In our continuing episodes relative to the appearance of man in the fossil record, we now come to Homo habilis, handyman, first discovered and termed the Olduvai hominid in 1964. This fossil bed that was discovered produced human fossils, fully human in profile, but at the same time produced other fossils that were distinctively ape-like, and they were put together to suggest this incredible creature with a face very similar to that of our cousins, with hair, yes, but the ability as the handyman to use tools, and the ability to fully walk upright, a bit hairy, but the feet were normal in profile like yours and mine. So what are the real facts regarding Homo habilis? It was later discovered that the archaic human fossils discovered at the site really were human, totally human, but that the archaic ape fossils discovered at the site, the lower primate fossils, were fully simian. The two did not belong together. It is quite normal and quite contemporary for man to run around with other creatures or other creatures to follow and mimic man. That is a part of the design and profile and myriad distinctives of the creation model itself. So here we find what actually turned out to be a phantom taxon, no existence at all, throwing together human fossils and ape fossils, supposing that they belong together. Therefore, as we illustrate at the Creation Evidence Museum, each of these progressions to modern human in the evolutionary mind has certain fossils. There is no white area behind this Homo habilis, handyman, at all, because there are no fossils to support it. All the fossils are either truly human or truly ape. Thus, we've crossed out every single link leading to man. We've crossed out the Tang child. We've crossed out Lucy, Ramapithecus. We've crossed out the Nebraska man, and now we cross out Homo habilis. It appears that the scholars were right when they said there are no actual fossils directly antecedent to man. Man appears full-blown. The apes didn't produce him. As we continue our expose relative to the appearance of man in the fossil record, we now come to one of the most famous and most influential of all the ape men ever discovered. It was discovered as Eoanthropus dawsoni in 1912 near Plitdown, East Sussex, England. The discovery was made in a pit in a burial area, and for the next 4 decades, this would be the most influential fossil that would anchor evolutionary theory. In fact, it's been reported that over 500 PhDs were granted from dissertations that centered in Plitdown man and on its discovery and on the evidence, even though very few scholars ever saw the actual fossil. Now, the profile of Plitdown man shows not only totally human profile, including the musculature necessary for normal upward walk and gait. But what was actually discovered? Skull fragments that were human and were quite archaic. Charles Dawson made this discovery, and the skull cap at least, was archaic human. The same color was a jaw that was distinctively ape-like with 2 teeth. That was in 1912. This anchored evolutionary theory. Man had descended from an ape-like creature. Until 1953, when additional scholars were permitted to examine the actual fossils, and when our microscopes had been developed to the point where it was determined that the skull was archaic but fully human. But it was then determined that the jawbone had actually been an ape's jawbone stained to the same color to make it appear antique, and the teeth had been filed down. In very short order, it was recognized that Plitdown man was a hoax, a forgery, but it had already anchored evolutionary theory. We, in approaching the truth of man's appearance in the fossil record, have to dismiss him, and even the evolutionists have now published, New Scientist and other major publications, that this fooled the greatest minds in paleoanthropology until 1953, when the remains were revealed as planted, altered, a forgery. This is from the technical evolutionary literature. So Plitdown man is removed from our pedigree. So is Homo habilis. So is Nebraska man. So are all the others leading to the descent of man in the evolutionary profile. In our continuing episodes relative to the appearance of man in the fossil record, we now turn our attention to Homo erectus. First touted, when bones were discovered some decades ago, first touted as being an archaic human being, pre-human but distinctive from the apes. However, it was later recognized that this individual, according to New Scientist, a secular evolutionary publication, it was recognized that Homo erectus is insufficiently distinct, meaning he's parallel with Homo sapiens. All fossil remains of Homo erectus and archaic Homo sapiens, including Neanderthals, should be reclassified into a single species, Homo sapiens, which is to be subdivided only into races. So now the leading evolutionary scholars admit Homo erectus was fully human. He was not a developing ape, a pre-human, but the general public has no idea that this thinking, that this evidence has transpired. The general public still holds that Homo erectus was just barely removed from the apes. Let's get the real facts. Evidence shows that he was actually living contemporary with the Erectus people. The Erectus people who lived in a valley in Germany actually made star charts of Orion, getting the shorter and longer legs exactly precise, recognizing its significance in anthology of the human race. In addition to that, they carved on tusks and bones the gestation period, showing that they were just as human as our great-grandparents were under semi-primitive conditions. In fact, they did better than many of our modern people have done. These were totally modern people. So thus, when man appears in the fossil record, he does not appear as being simian, pre-human, with any ape-like characteristics. He appears with his culture being essential in parallel to Homo sapiens. He appears with his forebears and those who were his contemporaries actually studying the stars and examining the birth times and the gestation periods of human beings. When man appears in the fossil record, he is fully recognized as being human. In our continuing episodes relative to the appearance of man in the fossil record, we now come to the famous Neanderthal man. First discovered in the Neander Valley in Germany, this fella was stoop-shouldered, slanted brow, appeared to be rather brutish, and was so recognized that way until additional discoveries revealed that this individual had rickets from lack of exposure, lack of vitamin D, lack of exposure to sunshine. He lived during the Ice Age and essentially was contemporary with Job. The additional skeletal remains of Neanderthal man showed them to be an incredibly advanced civilization. They even performed surgery. They had hearths. They had a large guild with workshops, with tools, artifacts, stone, leather, wood, and bone. It was later discovered that these individuals actually lived longer than people do today. Actual laboratory tests have been run indicating that some of these Neanderthal people lived to be over 200 years in age just a few thousand years ago. So what are the real facts about Neanderthal? Well, his skeletal remains show that he was about our height in stature, but his bones were thicker, he was more robust, he was more attuned to his environment, and his cranial capacity, in contrast to ours being average 1,350 cc's, his cranial capacity averaged 1,450 cc's. His brain was larger than ours. That is absolutely incredible. So it is now recognized that detailed comparisons of Neanderthal skeletal remains with those of modern humans have shown that there is nothing in Neanderthal anatomy that conclusively indicates locomotor, manipulative, intellectual, or linguistic abilities inferior to those of modern humans. And this was written in Natural History, a secular evolutionary journal. In addition to that, Neanderthal care and compassion have been indicated with a number of broken bones having been mended, old people having been taken care of, elaborate rituals in funerary. We find these individuals as sophisticated as ourselves in our culture. Isolated, yes. Living in the Ice Age, in caves and under cliffs. They wouldn't have access to larger profile of artifacts, but under their conditions, they were actually superior to modern man. So thus, the Neanderthal is not in evolutionary development, but was actually contemporary with Job. And as Job's companions knew about the Creator and the evidence in the stars, it is apparent that Neanderthal and his entire civilization, as well as his contemporary Erectus and Cro-Magnons, actually knew about the Creator as has been revealed in the Scriptures. In our episodes relative to the appearance of man and the fossil record, we've crossed out the Tang child, Lucy, Ramapithecus, Homo habilis, the Nebraska man, and we've crossed out the Plitdown man, all as being literally not involved in a descent from lower primates to man. They've all been crossed out. When man appears in the fossil record as Homo erectus, as Erectus, as Neanderthal, and as Cro-Magnon, he is fully functional, in fact, parallel, and in many respects superior to modern man. We found that Homo erectus and Neanderthal man had cranial capacities exceeding ours. We have an average of 1,350 cc's, Neanderthal 1,450 cc's. But now we come to Cro-Magnon man. His cranial capacity averaged 1,650 cc's. A man living contemporary with Job, or a culture living contemporary with Job, contemporary with Homo erectus, Erectus, and Neanderthal, but isolated in a valley in Germany, this culture exhibited incredible abilities far beyond modern man to achieve in a short period of time. For instance, their javelins were beautiful. They were adhesed, along with Neanderthal man, adhesed with a technique requiring birch bark resin to be heated to 900 degrees Fahrenheit to adhese the shaft to the spear point. And when it's broken, the adhesion does not break. Either the shaft or the spear point breaks. Absolutely superior. How did they develop this technology? They were far superior to us in stature, in longevity, and it's been recognized that along with a robust build, superior cranial capacity, characteristics, this early man 1600 plus, 1650 versus 1350 for modern man. The Lassal caves in France reveal colorful paintings that in many respects rival some of the works of the great masters. Some paintings may relate to phases of the moon, Pleiades, star cluster, and the summer triangle. Various sites feature beautifully made javelins, arrows, and ornate artifacts, even carvings and idols to worship. They were contemporary with Job. Job's companions knew about the God of creation and deviation from that, and this could infer definitely that Cro-Magnon was like that culture, but quite superior. But I want to emphasize this final point. One of the paintings in the cave having to do with Cro-Magnon man is a phase of the moon chart, even showing the time when the moon is darkened. But especially this phase diagram has to do with its effect on the animals. Here we have a young colt who is raising his hind legs to his body and jolting those hind legs. He is behaving differently at different phases of the moon. It was not recognized until modern generations that the phases of the moon actually affect, because of the anorthite, which covers the surface of the moon, being radiated and transmitting acoustical energy. Because of this, it has now been recognized that the moon affects the behavior of animals and to some degree the effect of man. But Cro-Magnon not only recognized that, he illustrated that and diagrammed it in the charts. He was absolutely superior.
Horseman is very brief. It was found in southern Spanish town of Ors, or Orce if you're very posh, and I'm not. This is 1982. It was claimed that it was the oldest fossil human remains ever found in Europe. All they found is one fragment of one skull, not even a full skull. It's a fragment of one skull. Can you see the picture up there? Our trusted archaeologist said that this belonged to a 17-year-old man and who lived 900,000 to 1.6 million years ago. So the archaeologist dated this. He said it belonged to a 17-year-old man and lived between 900,000 and 1.6. They got so excited about this, right? You got to hear this. They were going to throw a whole big party. Okay, so they got together, they're going to throw a big party, and just about before they did it, they discovered that it came from a donkey. I don't mean the archaeologist. Okay, this was a real donkey, and it was from a 4-month-old donkey. They still refuse to accept this as a hoax or a misunderstanding on a fossil.
It was used for years as evidence for evolution. Everything disappeared during World War II. But they found a cave with a bunch of crushed monkey skulls in there. The skull had been smashed, and they found a bunch of human tools. And so some brilliant scientist said, wow, these monkeys are learning to make tools. Oh, and they're practicing on their head. Yeah, that's a good one. Let's keep that one right over here. Well, duh. They didn't tell anybody. They found 10 normal humans in the same cave, skeletons of humans. See, in some cultures, they like to eat monkey brains. You ever seen Indiana Jones? Mm-hmm. They just found a cave where they were eating monkeys. That's where they had their feasts or something. It's not a missing link.
Well, I don't have them here, obviously, but you can go to any museum and you can see Australopithecus, you can see Homo habilis, you can see Homo erectus, you can see archaic Homo sapiens and modern Homo sapiens. A beautiful series of intermediates. Why do you keep saying present me with the evidence when I've done so? Go to the museum and look.
I have gone to the museums, and so have so many of us who still are not convinced
Have you
with
seen
evolution.
Have you seen Homo erectus?
And I think